Hello everyone, and welcome back to another moment of awesome here on Science and Sorcery. My name is Sam, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm delighted to be back to talk to another member of the TTRPG community about who they are, what they do, and why they're awesome. So, hello to my wonderful guest. Who are you, and what do you do?
Hi, my name is Zach. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the director of Muppet Publishing, which is a UK-based indie RPG company that makes rules-light, heavily emotive indie games from not only myself, but also creators around the world. We're currently working on a game called Paint the Town Red, which I guess is what we're here to talk about today, Sam.
Yeah, so that ultimate triple threat then of sad gay vampires, which is what Paint the Town Red kind of focuses on. Where did the idea come from to go with this theme for this game?
Yeah, so I guess Soul Muppet's got a bit of a reputation for making sad games. We just come off, we've made Orbital Blues, which is a sad space cowboy game, and then we'd recently made a game called Inevitable about a group of sort of Arthurian Western was the genre of that game. It's about a group of knights on a failed attempt to stop an unstoppable apocalypse, and sort of telling those kind of those stories about characters in really difficult situations, doing the best they can to get on with what's happening. And Paint the Town Red was like it almost felt like a natural extrapolation of that. The game is about like these characters who have died, whatever we want to use that as a metaphor for, and they're chasing the sensation of being alive. They want to be like they used to be, but in a new way, and are struggling with the fact that their bodies are now cold, their hearts are dead, they feel great sadness inside them, and the way they get around this is, well, painting the town red, having a big party, engaging in these sort of what begins as these hedonistic pursuits that then transform into sort of a sensation of like chasing fulfillment in the many ways that can appear in a role-playing game. So one of the things I've said a lot while talking about the game, it's not a game about like being sad and reveling in it. It's a game about desperately not wanting to be sad and kind of pushing towards some big hopeful future you're trying to build together, but obviously explored through the mediums of this sort of slice of life, urban vampiric unlife nightlife. I've said night too many times, but you know what I mean. Like this kind of experience of all these characters coming together, forming this sort of found family of these sort of broken and difficult people, and then something beautiful emerging from that as they do what they can to search for self-fulfillment.
It's a really interesting take on the kind of vampire genre, I think, and that you get, because we've got like What We Do in the Shadows, which is like a big thing in the vampire world right now, which is that kind of hedonistic style, like kind of comedy route. But I've always really found it fascinating, the idea of a being that is going to live forever. It's going to go through so many like intense, horrific, emotional experiences, and I guess that's part of where this game leans into.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the thing is with a lot of the media that makes this game significant, when things are sad, they can also be really, really funny ultimately, and vice versa, right? There is the tragic comedy is like a really established genre, and while you can play Paint the Town Red as like a sort of really straight, sad game that is dealing with the tragedy of what this is like, it can also be like about what people do when they feel like that. Because if you watch What We Do in the Shadows, there are some really heavy hitting moments in that show, and also if you watch some sort of a lot of like severe media that feels that way, often black comedy can emerge from those horrid situations. The thing in the sort of public consciousness at the moment that speaks to me a lot is actually like something like Succession, right? The TV show, like that is awful and about these terrible people doing terrible things for whatever reasons they do, but is also like fundamentally hilarious because of the situations these people find themselves in. These, you know, often terrible yet somehow still sympathetic characters. It's a really sort of fascinating space to exist in, because there's much we talk about games being about genre. Lots of genres can emerge from games, not always ones that are intended. So yeah, there's definitely room for it. So many things to happen within the scope of this game.
Succession has made me really think about how you could play a game with a group of vampires in that sort of world, because you're right, like they're horrible people, but you love them and you want to see what they do, or you feel sorry for them. Oh, I love it. Like, that's just made my brain start to tick over and over and over more. As part of the game,
Succession is that those type of characters are not the protagonists of
exactly.
Paint the Town Red. They are very much the antagonists that exist in that space, within the sort of like conservative undead who are interested in like the accumulation of power and money and are less interested in happiness than some other thing to do with control, how they're like seeking that. Sort of the opposite of our sort of more liberal, leftist, queer-coded characters that you often have appearing in the game. So, you know, but yeah, it's totally a space for that kind of group to exist, of these interesting characters who you hate but you want to see succeed, that are full of so many of these like of so much hypocrisy, right? Is something quite beautiful about it. But yeah, that's a bit of a sidetrack.
No, I love it. Part of the game as well that I'd love to know more about your thoughts and how it's come up to be is the cities where the game takes place, being known as, like, I don't know how to pluralize this word, but like necropolises. And part of the core book, there's a range of era settings and world locations as part of that. Like, how did these come to be chosen, the specific ones that are going to be there? Was it hard to narrow it down, or?
Well, so I wrote 3 of them, and I sort of knew 2 of the ones I wanted to do really early on, because I wanted to pick the sort of settings I understood the most as, you know, a white British person, and then also expand my availability to be able to talk to more people with more understanding than me of more obscure parts of history. So I started off with Victorian London. That was sort of the adventure that's in the quick start, and there's a bunch of the playtesting of. And then we started, I knew I wanted to do ancient Rome, because that like felt like a really interesting point. Like, we frame Rome in the book as like the first big necropolis, like the first one that kind of appeared as things were happening, and then kind of looking at how the undead appear at different parts of history and which directions they were moving in. One of the things that I've done as part of the full book is that I've written a 8,000 word pseudo scientific article about, that isn't real obviously, about like undead migration, but which has been created by a 21st century parapsychologist reviewing various undead characters, and sort of asking them, where were you at this time? What was this culture like? What's happening? And sort of using that to measure the movements of the undead throughout history. So what I was kind of doing is looking at that and working out, like, well, I'm looking at this history, and the understanding and the sort of hypothesis I have to give is that there's undead everywhere, especially in the places where there's lots of people, and working out what they're doing and where they're going to be and what those interesting things are and what the flow of characters is about. Because not only does undead society move through these different places through time, but also so do the characters, the individual characters from the adventures, right? They start in one place and they often move alongside you. The way you play this game on ahead, if you're playing, let's say, a 12-session campaign, you do 3 to 4 session cities with a gap in between them, where you kind of have a montage about what happens in the 600 years in the middle, and you can use that to like track the movement of not only your characters, also all these other characters and factions through time. If you like were to sit down and read all 6 of the adventures, you'd see that there's this flow chart of like characters going in different places and doing different things, and some of them are like staying the same throughout time, but some of them are like fundamentally changing in the way they are. One of my favorite examples is one of the characters in the Rome adventure is the chariot racer called Sava, who's like the greatest chariot racer in Rome at the time, because she's one of the only ones that when she dies on the racetrack, she can just get back up and start again. So she's the best racer. And then 1800 years later, by the time we get to It Never Sleeps in Great Depression New York in 1928, she's now a taxi driver, right? And is like racing around the streets of New York trying to get undead everywhere else because she can, right? Because that's her thing now. That's what she's doing. She knows how to race. So watching all of these characters move through time along with all of the players is like a really interesting part of it. But the big part of that is like I had my own ideas of like what these characters were doing throughout time, what was happening in Europe and Africa and the Middle East and in Asia and in wherever else, you know, America, Australia, South America, and mapping all that stuff. And then reaching out to as many awesome creators as I can and saying like, hey, do you have any ideas for an adventure you want to do? And, you know, I approached so many people and kind of picked some of my favorites on there, some of which really fit with the idea of what I wanted to happen. And then some of them I had to fit into that space afterwards. So the answer, we've got 6 adventures in the starter book, and if we hit stretch goals, there's a load more. We've got a solo adventure coming that is going to be written by Elliot Davis if we hit that stretch goal. And then the one I really want to get to is we're doing a vampire Cold War stretch goal where we look at like various vampiric elements of the KGB and CIA interacting with third and second and first world countries throughout that period and kind of fighting this battle of necromantic espionage alongside some quite heavy political stuff, because, you know, our characters are fundamentally opposed to these great forces that exist to tell them what it means to live in your own death. So essentially what we were trying to do was like build a consistent and flavorful way, like a toolbox almost, about like how to interact with history, because I also don't want someone to have to read a book on Victorian London like I did when writing the adventure for them to be able to run it, right? I want to give them all the information there in a nice, tight, compact thing that you can then use to spin off Infinite Adventure. And by combining that with all the other things we've written and some of the ones that hopefully will start being created as the game is made and released, because there's going to be a third-party license that lets you work out what Sava was doing in the 1800 years in between. Does she end up in, in Constantinople for all the blues and the greens having their chariot races there during the 800s? Or is she going to end up joining the Mongol horse hordes or something? Like, anything could happen in the space of these characters because they're never going to die and they're always wanting to do something, right? So how did we pick them? Just picking the most interesting and vibrant thing we could do that could make you go, oh man, that's a sick idea for what a vampire could be doing at this point in time. And then getting people to write them who are preferably from that part of the world or understand it very well, so that they give you some of the knowledge that they have about how to play.
Thank you for that answer. That was it's really amazing to think about the way that, like, say, like that one character could change throughout all that time. One thing I was interested in, like, if you're looking back in like history of where they've come from and where they go to, is part of the book exploring the origins of vampirism as well, or where they picked that up? Is that in there?
Well, one of the things that's true about this game is that the characters, nobody really understands where undeath comes from, right? Because it's not vampirism. Vampirism is a specific condition of undeath where you are a vampire you are an undead who wants to feel alive. And there are also zombies and liches and werewolves and ghouls and ghosts, all of which there are rules within the full book, which we're crowdfunding right now, to expand those as characters also in there. And kind of, you probably wouldn't want to play a whole party of zombies. It could be done, certainly, but having them mixed into these other groups is really interesting. And we don't really talk that much about what happened, but there is this really interesting section in that portfolio, in the article rather, where the writer is saying, like, I'm finding all of these undead from different points in history or from different places. It's clear there's no point that it like spread from. It must be some magical curse that is happening in some way. We don't understand the curse of undeath, and while there are certainly NPCs in some of the adventures who are interested in learning more about it, you know, there's definitely no answers in the book as to where that comes from. I personally don't even know, never mind writing down what happened. Maybe I do know and I'm lying to you, but you know, it's definitely something you could explore in a really long campaign if you wanted to, if you had players that were interested in solving that kind of mystery. Maybe something for the future.
I quite like it being left like a little grey as well, because it, as you say, allows you to come up with your own thoughts and theories and where it might have come from. You mentioned about getting other creators involved in writing stories, and we're already seeing like the My First Dungeon podcast that's come out, like exploring the kind of 1920s stage of things. How important do you find it then to like involve other members of the community in the creation of games, or like showcasing what these games can do? How important is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, community is like such an important thing for myself and Muppet. Like, in terms of like how I create things, like collaborations with other people make games better always. Like, I think there are very few people within our industry and within creative fields overall who are such auteur geniuses that their ideas are not benefited by conversation and collaboration, right? I think that the sum of parts is always better than something like that. And for this, it was simply about drawing from places that people and places that have an understanding of culture that I could never replicate. You know, and with art as well, that can be something really meaningful. We've also tried to work with a whole lot of different artists to, you know, make the adventures all have their own different feel and be pulling from a certain period of history or a style of art to be depicted in that way. You know, just for an example, one of the adventures in the core book is called Party Crashing in Splendid Ghazni, which is Ghazni in Afghanistan in the 11th century. It's about 100 miles south of Kabul, and it's this like really interesting melting pot of like the Ghaznavid Empire, who is at this point like expanding out of the part of Afghanistan they live in and attempting to sort of make forays into northern India and into parts of Iraq, and sort of is creating this real melting pot. You know, is Islamic culture in this part of the world is something that they just don't teach people in schools in the UK, because in the only history you'll learn about, I mean, certainly at the school I went to, was they start telling you about the Arab-Israeli war as if nothing before that ever happened, right? Whereas in fact, there are thousands of years of history that are relevant in that area. So I was able to work with Bashir Gauss, who is Middle Eastern, who had a huge wealth of knowledge on this part of like Muslim culture, which then borrows bits from like Christians and Buddhists and Hindus in the area, because obviously it's a big melting pot from all of the spoils of war, knowledge and scholars and soldiers ultimately that came in from all these different parts of Europe. And like, it's so wonderful as a publisher to speak to someone about an adventure, get really excited, and then work come back that you never could have even considered to make yourself. And it's great knowing that before the game has even come out, there are other people writing better Paint the Town Red adventures than I ever could, you know, which is already a valuable thing. And I'm sure in a few years that will even more be the case, especially once we get started on the third-party stuff, which is already, I had a manuscript for me sent this morning for a big adventure set in Stockholm across 3 eras of Stockholm. So that's like a 20,000 word adventure done by my friend Attis. So like, that's going to be up, and that might be out before the crowdfunding campaign ends. So you won't be waiting for me to publish all my adventures before you'll be able to play a thousands of year spanning thing that happens in all this way. And that's the benefit of community, you know, and making sure other people have the knowledge and the structure. And the book isn't just about you playing in my stuff or what I've written for you or what my collaborators have written for you. Like, there's also a big chunk of the book which is about making your own necropolises and what ways you'd go about writing that adventure. Because every time I speak to someone about this game, they're like, oh, I want to run a game in 1980s Miami, or Constantinople in the 800s, or Court of Love, Aquitaine, France in the 13th century, or mercenaries in North Italy after the end of the 100 Years' War. And I could just keep rattling off adventure ideas like that, because everybody I've spoken to has their own idea about what they do with this game. And that's what's fascinating, because history is such a broad canvas, and you have the space because you can add vampires to it. It's not like playing a hard historical game where, like, it's very relevant if you might get something wrong historically. Vampires did it. So, and they were there, your characters were there, and you weren't. So they're more right than we were. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. I'm just really enjoying listening to, like, where you're thinking about, especially the kind of Middle Eastern history that we just don't hear here. Like, as a scientist, we have so much of that knowledge that we don't know where it came from. Well, we know where it came from, but we're not taught where it came from. So thinking the same about, like, kind of culture and history is great and amazing to see happening with this game. We're rapidly running out of time, but I've got a couple other things I wanted to ask you, which was, what advice would you give to someone who's hoping, or who would be hoping to get into TTRPG publishing or writing in any of its forms?
Oh yeah, so I think publishing is the thing I'm most able to talk about, because I'm definitely not a freelance writer. That's not something that I've done much of. I think my advice is always to be, I think a lot of people who are trying to make something start with, like, their most ambitious idea and come up with this thing for this huge hundreds and hundreds of page setting that they're going to do. Making those books is really expensive if you want to do it really well. I always recommend, when I'm talking with people consulting, is to do a couple of, like, minimum viable product projects where you're like, how can I have an idea that isn't a 100-page book, it's a 24-page zine? And you can apply the knowledge you learn by making 1 or 2 or 3 of those style of books and slowly scale up your ambition as you work. The hardest bit about doing crowdfunding isn't making money. It's about not losing all the money you make making mistakes. So starting in a space where you're able to play in a space, play in an environment which you're comfortable taking safe risks and knowing what it is that can happen at certain stages without that being massively impactful is really helpful. Obviously, that's easier for some people than others, but yeah, my main piece of advice would start with the third biggest idea you have, rather than the thing you've always wanted to make, if that makes sense.
Yeah, everybody has to start somewhere, and start at the scale that works for you, I guess. We've already talked a little bit about community as well. What's exciting you most about the TTRPG community right now?
The thing I'm really looking forward to in the scene is, like, an increase in the quality of journalism and press we're hoping to get over the next few months. Over the last year, like, Rascal starting has been a real a boon for the ability of people to get the word out and talk about things, and plus actually creating, like, more hard-hitting journalism than some of the stuff we used to get. It was a real shame to see some outfits close down or refactor their offering to exist in a different way, and I think that a healthy journalistic review scene is really something that we haven't had for a while, and getting more of that news out there, being able to talk to each other more, and more stuff existing, right? The democratization of being able to create things on the internet over the last few years has really led into more in that space, in terms of, like, podcasts and video formats and interview spaces, because a long time ago, if those existed, they were very focused towards D&D, whereas certain platforms growing not in that space has been really beneficial for the scene at large. So the thing that's actually exciting me most about the creation of tabletop role-playing game books in the future is nothing to do with books. It's all to do with the surrounding information media that will be able to exist surrounding it, to do with actual play and journalism and reviews. And I'd love for those things to grow more and to exist in a better space and a healthier space, where the conversation in the room is not just being dominated by one game as it has been for a very long time now. It's good to be able to hear more of that stuff from more people with opinions and spaces to share those opinions on.
Here, here. Right, we're at very much at the end. Thank you so much for coming to have this chat. Where can people find out more about you, about Muppet, and about your crowdfunder, which is still running?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I'm Zach, but I go by Jellymuppet on most social media, and the company that I make RPGs with is called Muppet Publishing. You can find us via that name on most social medias. Paint the Town Red is on Backerkit right now as you're listening to this. Where crowdfunding will hopefully have funded in the next few days. By the time you're listening to this, we should be looking at some stretch goals. And I'd really encourage you to check out that Backerkit. If the stuff we've talked about sounds interesting, but you don't fancy immediately committing to a full game, there is a free quick start of the game. And by free quick start, I do mean it's like an 82-page, no, it's a 90-page book. So I actually just made a full RPG and then released it, and then I'm actually crowdfunding a series of expansions and DLCs for it, really, because I have poor impulse control. So that's an opportunity for it to kind of wet your legs and have a look about what is going to happen in games. And hopefully you'll be able to see some more Paint the Town Red coming from us.
Amazing. Thank you so much again for coming to have this chat. Time just absolutely vanishes from us. And folks, if you're watching at home, do check out the links that are alongside this video, or check the card for the Backerkit. And until next time, see you then. Goodbye and take care.
See you soon. Bye.